Welcome to the Afterglow podcast, a space to practice Yoga Nidra informed by the ideas of Carl Jung and internal family systems. Each week we will work on a different life theme, giving us the opportunity to discover vast inner landscapes, sitting with all that life has to offer as we explore who we are. May the afterglow be as bright as the journey is deep. Hi. Today I'm going to be talking about how to bring the body into the conversation. How we can use Yoga Nidra as a way to listen to the body. This is very similar to what we did with the nervous system in episode 3. And when we do these practices more regularly, we get better and better, and it makes it easier to keep the body in the conversation. For some people this comes easily, for others this requires a commitment to slowly coaxing our bodies back to us after we have shut them off or been dissociated for too long. The practice is a way to meet our bodies where they are and investigate how we can communicate with them better, how we can listen better, serve them better. Like so many people, I used to think that I was more of a thinking type of person. I operated with this binary perception that you were someone who was either more in their body or more in their brain, and that this was a natural sort of way to be. You were either one or the other. And I felt a secret pride over the fact that my mental faculties were stronger than my physical ones, because that felt to me to be the much more desirable type. Now I think I try my best, I will say, to see it a bit differently. I do sometimes find myself still thinking in that binary way, and I have to sort of bring myself back into a new belief system that serves me much better when I do, because I don't think that you are one or the other. I think that it's much more likely that you simply favor one and disconnect from the other. Last year I heard someone say, "I'm dead from the neck down," and then she laughed, inviting us with her eyes and her laughter, the people that she was sitting with. She invited us to laugh along with her. Her young daughter was sitting next to her. She was about 10 years old, maybe had just turned 11. I think everyone feels like that sometimes, especially women. I also know that people with gender dysphoria describe their relationship with their bodies and how much easier it is to disconnect from them because the feelings that they have about their bodies are too complex and overwhelming to sit with. I think a lot of us decide that our bodies are simply a tool. They need to be good at getting us from A to B, and they need to be good at receiving pleasure from touch or from food, and they need to be physically appealing in all ways at all times. Even if we consciously know that that isn't logical, we still fall into this idealism and silently berate our bodies for being to this or to that. None of this is new, and yet socially we seem to be moving backwards. People with healthy bodies are using Ozempic to starve themselves, and I even saw the other day that there is an obscure trend in China where women have to pass what they call the fish test, where they're in their collarbones need to stick out enough that they can put a small fish in water in the hollow of their collarbones. Now I understand that this is just Instagram reels probably creating just nonsense on my feed, and despite myself I watched it and whether or not this is like a genuine trend and it is a thing, the fact that it's believable that it could be a trend is the alarming thing. That people will go to such extreme, bizarre levels for an ideal, and it completely is in opposition with what their body needs or wants or should be. It's like the body is seen as clay to be molded and forced into position, and that is a non-negotiable. And obviously when we phrase it like that, it's impossible to think that that is what our bodies deserve. Our bodies obviously deserve a lot better. And there is, of course, a social conversation about loving our bodies as they are, but that just seems to be perennially uncool. And often it just comes across as shaming, because now we feel guilty for failing to love our bodies sufficiently. It's so much easier to neglect our bodies to the point where we can confess that we are dissociated from them and pass it off as a joke. I am dead from the waist down. If you think about it, that's a really alarming thing to say. And I think that the reason why nobody felt really all that alarmed is because everyone understands that feeling, even if they're not making the joke. And this short story of the mother and daughter also illustrates how we hand this dynamic of neglecting our bodies, we hand it over to the next generation. And it's probably also a problem that was given to us from our parents or the people who raised us. So it is possible we don't even remember the moment when we disconnected. It is just how things have always been. Whether it is because of pressures to be skinny or muscular, maybe it is because of a disability, maybe it is because of a physical trauma or abuse. Perhaps it is due to chronic illness, gender dysphoria, or because it has simply been easier to separate the sense of self with the sense of physical reality. If those things are separated, compartmentalized, maybe they're easier to deal with. Of course, that isn't true, because if we're not ever really dealing with the one, then it's not easier. It's just being neglected. Part of an individuation process is integrating the body self with the self with a capital S. Often in therapy we talk both in talk therapy and also absolutely in internal family systems as well. The therapist will start by asking where you feel something in your body. This is a really good launching pad, because even people who have severely disconnected themselves from their physical reality will, after some time, be able to locate a sense perception of a feeling somewhere in their body. In fact, therapists of all kinds will talk about how frequently it happens that someone will say, "No, I feel nothing." And then after some gentle investigation, the person will say something like, I get heartburn every time my mother calls, but that's different. And therapists can't help but laugh, because that is the disconnect. It isn't that we don't feel anything, it is that we don't connect the sensation with something internal. Part of working in this holistic way means that we start recognizing somatic symptoms and acknowledging them. This can look like any number of ways, depending on how you want to do it. You can baby yourself by saying to your chronic IBS, "Oh, my darling, my darling, my darling intestines. You are so tired, so stressed out, so exhausted from trying to get my attention. And all I do is complain that you are not doing your job. I am so sorry. I am here. I'm going to listen better." You can also use more neutral language. My migraines are really impractical in my life. They interrupt and slow down my progress, because everything has to come to a halt as I can't function when they come. But I will not add extra guilt or anger to this. Instead, I will accept that there is a part of me that requires that I down tools and rest It requires that I find within that pain a part of myself to sit with and to give my undivided presence and attention to. It requires that I witness the pain with no sense of frustration or bitterness. The body is a working miracle. The incredibly complex system operates without our conscious awareness as we repair wounds, fight off viruses, adjust our hormones to external circumstances, move to safety, move to express complex feelings through dance, cry, laugh, think, digest, grow enamel, or any number of other incomprehensibly brilliant things. I'm going to say something obvious now, but it is the kind of obvious that we don't really ever think about, and when we do, we can't help but feel strange. We know how to circulate blood or build tissue cells or heal wounds. It just isn't a conscious knowing. And I don't even mean that intellectually. Like, if we study a textbook on cells, we will learn how to do things. I mean, no matter how much I concentrate, no matter how well I understand basic biology or in really complex biology, I cannot make my cells do anything in accordance with my conscious will, apart from move my muscles, maybe. So, who does know? Where is that knowing? There is a nebulous force within me operating my physical body without my conscious awareness. It is clearly accessing external stimuli information and responding to it. That is why I break out in a sweat and get a rush of adrenaline if I see a spooky figure walking towards me in a dark alleyway. There is a famous book, The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk, and it talks extensively about the ways in which trauma is stored in the body, how there is a mechanism at play that has its own functioning system of logic. If you are listening to a Yoga Nidra podcast called Listening to the Body, I'm probably preaching to the choir, and you need no convincing that there is a physical knowing that speaks to us through somatic symptoms. The question left in the wake of that understanding is, what do I do with that? Well, the best answer I can offer you is to sit with yourself, to sit with your body in a state of openness and love, and let go of the urge to take mental control of everything. Let go of the urge to define, order, demand, analyze. Let go of the need for logical, easy, linear representations. One of my favorite Emily Dickinson poems is "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." In fact, the title is the first line and also my favorite line of the entire poem. It is a very short poem, but I'm going to read this very short poem in full now. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight. The truth's superb surprise, as the lightning to the children eased, with explanation kind. The truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. I think sometimes we just want to make an easy connection. A real life example from someone that I know that I can give you now is that when she was a child, she had asthma attacks every time she went to her grandparents' house because she found that the emotional environment was very stifling. It's a pretty easy connection to make, but often the connection isn't so obvious. The truth is at a slant. It requires looking at it with a gradual awareness and trusting that in time we can see how two seemingly disconnected things are actually in conversation with each other. Because the connection isn't so obvious a lot of the time, and it does require that we need to sit with something and let it gradually make sense. A real life example is someone I worked with was they were often run down and feeling generally under the weather all of the time. In a Yoga Nidra focusing on the body, he experienced a very clear and very rapid message. A message that came into his mind with an intensity that surprised him. The message was that there was enormous strength, but that it was being pushed down, hidden. He said that the image that he saw and the feeling that went alongside the image was of a mountain standing up and having a human-shaped body. The mountain had been there, a great internal strength that was unshakable, just ready to stand up and be utilized. After the Yoga Nidra practice, the guy and I discussed some of the feelings, and he said that it felt similar to anger, but not quite. He sensed that at some point, or over long stretches of time, he had to quell his anger, and he accidentally also quelled his strength. But this didn't happen immediately. At first, it felt confusing to get this really clear image of being a mountain, of having a mountain of strength inside of him. He took this image to therapy and he worked with it, and in time he was able to separate out the idea of strength and anger, and he started to teach himself how to know the difference. Immediately after the Yoga Nidra, he did feel a bit better because he was able to touch on that strength. He had met it. It had come back into the light. Over time, his physical health improved as he realized how much shame he had been carrying around for being strong and creative. And this opened up a whole new area of analysis for him in his therapy around his parental complex and to do with jealousy that he was perceiving coming from his parents. I'll pick up on that in a minute. All inner work, whether it is Yoga Nidra or something similar, requires that we strengthen our ability to listen to the unconscious, to the body, to instinct or intuition, whichever word you want to use or however you want to imagine it, because it is incredibly easy to bring our ego conscious in as a director, deciding what is going on and how everything needs to be laid out to maintain a perfect conscious self-image. It would be easy to continue the narrative of being sickly, of being weak, of constantly being burdened by the weight of chronic illness that was difficult to pin down and just constantly floating around, always making him tired and pushing him further away from the things that he wanted to achieve. That narrative was strongly active in his conscious mind. And if his ego conscious wanted to direct the situation, it could quite happily go on continuing with that narrative. But by getting in touch with the unconscious mind and feeling this really overwhelmingly strong image and feeling come through together as one, it contradicted his preconceived notion of what was going on. This is part of what Jung refers to the integrating the shadow. These parts of ourselves that we send into the unconscious. In IFS, the same concept is referred to exiled parts. it's not a direct one-for-one exact shadow parts and exiled parts, but the overlap is much more often than not. The guy that I'm talking about, he felt that his parents, from childhood or teenage years, I forget exactly, he felt that each of his parents had their own way of feeling jealous towards him and his talents. And he began to develop a string of constant physical symptoms that suppressed his momentum. His artistic projects always stymied by an illness of some kind. Anger rose up as a response in his teens and 20s. And because he couldn't express to his parents what he wanted to express and what he was, feeling so burdened with, which was this fear that his parents would feel bad about themselves if he succeeded in ways that they could not. Because he couldn't express that, he expressed this feeling of anger and resentment in other ways. And of course, the perception is then that he's irrational, that he is an angry person. And as a teenager or even into his 20s, sometimes even in your 30s, it's really hard to differentiate between standing up for yourself and when your anger is out of control, when you're responding to something from the past or when you're responding to something from right now. And it's a very tricky thing for anyone to try and separate. And he did what a lot of teenagers do, which is he just suppressed both his strength and his anger. And the result for him, because it was easier to sacrifice himself and his artistic inclinations than risk making his parents feel bad about themselves, the result for him was this unconscious illness that would just mysteriously fall over him like a spell as soon as he was accomplishing anything or trying to build something that had creative value. Now, of course, we don't know what the truth is for his parents. We don't know how much of his fear of hurting his parents by being creatively productive, we don't know how much that fear was justified. It is, though, an incredibly common thing that happens to children and teens. This anxiety of outperforming parents is so prevalent that Jung's quote on this exact phenomenon is one of his most quoted quotes. And it is, "There is no greater burden on the child more than the unlived life of the parent." And while that may be, and while I think the answer in therapy sessions often is, and then my mother said this and that's why I'm like this, or if my father was less that, I wouldn't be dealing with this. And I do think that is ultimately so much of therapy. However, I think that there is also a profound spiritual practice on the other side of those moments, on the other side of grieving the parents we didn't have and truly accepting the ones we do. I think it can be a profound spiritual practice. However, that is not what this episode is about, and it is really not relevant to the point I want to illustrate. I only mention it because I think that there is a very common narrative of parent bashing when it comes to wellness and therapy circles, and I want to just try and do my small part to balance things out a little bit. Anyway, I use this story because I want to illustrate how things can be stirred up when you do this kind of body work, and you can take it to a therapist or you can sit with it for a while and chew on it. And sometimes it can take a long time and things don't immediately have a clear connection. I am currently trying to piece together what the image of a duck has to do with a symptom that I am currently having, and I don't have the answer yet, but the image of a duck just keeps coming into my mind, and the word duck, and I can't help but wonder if there's wordplay and I need to physically duck down. I don't know. But these are just ways to illustrate that sometimes it requires just a little bit of creative interpretation. But like dream interpretation, like any of these things, Jung has an amazing, simple solution. And when you're trying to figure out if you have found the right interpretation for a dream or a message from the unconscious, the way you know is that it, and I quote, just clicks. Jung himself said, it just clicks. You shouldn't have to try and force an image to be to fit something. That is a sign that your ego conscious is trying to hold on to a narrative that's just overplayed and wrong and just not helping anymore. Whereas when something comes through, like this guy with the mountain, it just clicked and he felt strong. He said, I feel so much strength, and I am scared that by being strong I will also have to be angry. And that was the work that he had to take on and continue that practice of slowly allowing himself to be strong and trusting himself to know what to do when anger came up. He was lucky enough that he was in therapy, and that also supported him, but you don't have to necessarily be in therapy for this kind of work. Anyway, so that's the message. That is the main point that I want to illustrate in this story. So if you want to go deep and you know that you have a lot of trauma around this kind of work, it is worth considering a therapist, especially if you have survived abuse, or there is that, or if you have a history of really being, your system being overwhelmed with emotional responses to something. Completely okay. We've all, I mean, I've been there. I know how terrifying it can be to do it on your own when your system is just totally overwhelmed. So by all means, you can do this practice with a therapist if you think that you will need the additional support. That being said, you're absolutely in control, and it's a very soothing practice. So that's more if you're in a really if you're in a space where you're working with some really, really, really deep, intense, overwhelming trauma. But for everyone else, you are absolutely fine to do this without a therapist. If you're in therapy, it's great to talk about it with a therapist, though. It just adds additional material that's really, really delicious to chew on with a therapist. So I'm not saying any of that to scare you or make it seem like you're about to unlock a chthonic force that is going to overwhelm you. The reality is that when you do this type of inner work, the fear of the thing is always much more intense than the thing itself. Jungians will often encourage dreamers who are being hounded by terrifying images of intruders or monsters. The Jungians encourage people to pause and to turn toward the object of terror and face it with a willingness to hear it out. Because it is my personal experience, it is the experience of many, many Jungians and many, many people in this world who have faced those intruders that they are parts of ourselves that we are avoiding. They are belief systems that need to be challenged. They are aspects of our identity which we are suppressing. It's not a sort of malignant external force coming for us. It's a part of ourselves that we are really wanting to avoid, but once we stop avoiding it, there is wonderful sense of relief. And I get it, it is terrifying, because at some point in our past we have chosen to isolate that quality of ourselves and label it as bad or overwhelming, and we banish it into the shadow, and we probably don't even remember doing this, which is why it's unfamiliar when it comes back to us and it's presented as an intruder. I'm just using an intruder as an example. It doesn't have to be presented in such a literal way. And we can progress through life and we develop these neuroses or these symptoms that reveal that something in us has been split, and we need to integrate that split part of ourselves back into the fold, and that is part of the process of individuation. So there is a bit of a trick to doing this work, of needing to get into a state of being receptive to listening to the unconscious. Yoga Nidra is one way of doing it, as is active imagination or even talk therapy, depending on the type of talk therapy being done. The trick can take some practice, some getting used to, and even if we are really comfortable in the space of listening to the unconscious, it isn't always a good day to do it. Sometimes I can't access that space because I'm too wound up or too scattered or too emotionally stimulated. And I still try, because if I have the time and the space to go inside, I can sometimes successfully go in and soothe myself, ground myself, and sometimes it can be the most rewarding experience. But equally, sometimes it just doesn't work. I just can't access that state of consciousness, that state of deep internal connection. And it is part of just building a practice of it, like anything, like even a sport. There are days when we are completely in the flow and we're not thinking about the movements of our body, we are just moving. And then there's other days where we just feel like we have completely, we've swapped our legs and our arms and we can't focus properly, and everything's out of sync. It's just part and parcel of any sort of continual practice that we have in our lives. Because sometimes it is just because we are too emotionally charged, or we've just spent too much time on electronic devices. And sometimes it is because we have to be in the outside world. The mind needs to go out and play. It needs to be external, to go and dance, to move, to be very engaged with external stimulus. And going inside could sometimes just exacerbate a feeling of internal claustrophobia. So these things just come with practice. And I say all of that because this particular practice of listening to the body, and like all Yoga Nidra really, but I find that it really comes up a lot when you're doing the body work, because it's difficult to put a name and a face to our body, because it's so close to us and because there is so much disconnection. This particular trick that I keep referring to, I just find that it tends to be much more necessary when doing body work, Yoga Nidra. So this trick, let me explain. Assuming we're able to get into the state of internal presence and calm, and we're feeling connected with ourselves, and we receive a new thought or feeling, and we sense that it is from the unconscious. One of the best indicators that it is from the unconscious is that it surprises us. Shadow work is very similar. It is believed among most Jungian analysts that if it is truly an encounter with the shadow self, it is most likely going to be uncomfortable to experience because we have pushed it away for a reason. Not all body work is necessarily going to be shadow work, just as a sort of a side note. There is an overlap, but not a perfect and complete one. Sometimes body work is just hearing from our body that it is tired, and we sit with it for a period of time, giving our body our dedicated attention, filled with love and gratitude. It isn't enough to intellectually think it. Oh, I'm grateful. Oh, I love my body. It doesn't have the same absorption rate. Maybe that's a good way of trying to picture it. Because the benefits of doing this type of body work, when we really close our eyes and we really go inside and we imagine that we're filling our bodies with love and gratitude, and we're paying attention and we're listening, the transformation, the release that comes from these experiences, it's not an intellectual thing. And if you have experienced it before, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you're going to have to just trust me that thinking about exercise is not the same as exercising. Thinking about body work is not the same as actually doing body work. So that's one of the main tricks when it comes to internal family systems, when it comes to even in talk therapy, and also sometimes when it comes to talking to a friend, and you have those moments where your friend asks you something, you start talking, and then as you're saying things that you've been feeling but you haven't actually consciously thought, and you start putting things together, and it's like happening in real time, but you don't. Sometimes it feels weird to tell your friend that this is like a thing that you're literally experiencing now and coming to terms with right now in the moment, and so you find yourself saying it as though it's something that you already knew, but actually it's all very like apparent in this moment, and then you confess, actually I'm just kind of putting all these things together, and you just sort of need to take a minute and go and write it down in a journal or something. That is all of these ways in which we suddenly encounter parts of ourselves, just the internal selves, just lurching outward and speaking and revealing itself to us. Sometimes it is in the middle of doing something else entirely. And sometimes it's when we're not consciously paying attention, and other times it's because we were paying extreme close attention, like in Yoga Nidra. And that feeling of surprise and it just clicks, that's the trick. That's when you know it's something that has come through. It's coming through from the unconscious. So how I'm going to talk a bit about listening to the body, different ways in which you can use this practice, how it could be relevant for you. It can also be, that you just as a quick little note before I dive a little bit deeper into the ways in which it could be useful. It doesn't always have to be some big, big moment between you and your body. It can just be a very gentle practice of appreciation, of love, of feeling really good, a way to sort of top up, a way to connect. And the message that you receive might be something like, you've been drinking too much, you've been eating too much crap, you need to drink more water, you need to exercise less, I'm tired, you're burning the candle too low here? Can you pull back the reins on the exercise? It can be stuff like that that isn't big, operatic, Jungian, like encounters with the self with a capital S, and it's all really, intense. It doesn't have to be that. But I'm also going to list a bunch of ways in which you can have some really profound connections with yourself. I recently did a Yoga Nidra to help mothers and people who breastfeed or chest feed to decide if they're ready to wean their child or not. This is a big decision that requires care and attention. Many psychoanalysts, in particular those who follow a Kleinian perspective, they feel that the process of weaning and the formative relationship that the child has to the breast, they help to formulate the child's psyche as they mature into an adult. And it's a really important, pivotal moment. The woman that I interviewed who was a breastfeeding expert, Emma Pickett, she was saying that sometimes, it's not even sometimes, it's really common where the parent says to the child who wants to feed, okay, fine, come, let's breastfeed. And the body is saying no. Like, she has now entered into a state of no longer wanting to breastfeed. And she maybe feels guilty, or there is something else happening under the surface. It could be anything, but she is saying yes, but her body is saying no, and there's a misalignment, and kids pick up on that, and it can be really confusing for them. And I'm not saying that to shame moms and add another thing to the list of all the ways in which moms are told that they're not doing a good enough job. I'm definitely not trying to do that at all. I'm more saying that you have an opportunity in that environment to go within and to figure out how you really feel, and then that's the step forward that you take afterwards. That is how you step out into your day, because you have checked in with yourself and you have made a decision about something. So I will not be making this Yoga Nidra specific. I'm going to give you a blank canvas where you can listen to your body in any way that you want. If you just want to sit in a state of deep love and appreciation for your body, then you can do that with ease. If you want to take a question to your body, such as, why am I so fucking tired all of the time? That is great. I'm going to do a list now of a few things that this type of practice is really, really well suited for. So it's good for spontaneous symptoms like hives, migraines, IBS, sudden physical tension. It's also good for chronic illnesses, especially ones that are autoimmune responses, like very frequently it's skin problems, digestion issues, or chronic constipation, things like that. Hair loss, swollen glands, joint pain, heartburn, asthma. It's also great for anything to do with sexual reproduction, for the sexual reproductive system, because it's one of the most sort of emotionally charged areas of the body. A lot of stuff gets unexpressed or suppressed and comes through whether it's something like impotence, vaginismus, irregular periods, hypersexuality, numbness, infertility, everything. There is a fortune of literature and everything to do with psychosomatic sexual disorders or symptoms. So this kind of practice is really, really good for that type of work. And it's awesome for any body image type of work, creating a relationship with the body that is built on an intimate space that you can create to listen to the body, to give it love and appreciation. That is the best medicine for shame. There is only benefits from doing this kind of body work when it comes to body image related stuff. And because just telling yourself that you're thinking about it wrong doesn't do anything. It just makes you feel worse about your brain. Then you're just redirecting or adding on the shame and the guilt, whereas actually hanging out with your body and really formulating a relationship, it becomes much easier to trust your body and for your body to trust you, and in time to release a lot of the sort of ego narratives that are just so prevalent. I keep thinking about the fish in the collarbone. So now I need to make a very clear statement around these types of symptoms. I am in no way suggesting that there isn't a medical reason for some of these symptoms. Maybe it's a vitamin D deficiency or a sports injury. By all means, investigate medical causality. The other thing that I want to make very clear is that this is a practice for developing the mindset of truly thanking the body for communicating with you. I know that it can feel inorganic sometimes to muster gratitude when you do not feel grateful because you feel angry or bitter, and it is easier to take that anger out on the body. But I promise you that is a sad and fruitless path. So even if it feels inorganic, it's a practice of slowly building comfort, and it will take time. If it doesn't happen immediately, it doesn't mean that it's never going to work. It just means you have work to do. Right, so you have the tools now to change the direction and start a holistic and intimate relationship with yourself where the experience is one of closeness, trust, and self-ease. Those tools are utilized in the process of Yoga Nidra, in that space of deep internal connection. And I promise you, the afterglow really is as bright as the journey is deep. Finally, I would like to share that the best attitude to have is of being curious about what you may discover. It is frequently the case that we discover things that bring profound relief, emotional relief, relief from pain, relief from chronic illness. It is not uncommon. In fact, that's the whole point of this practice. I wish you many, many wonderful experiences with it. Thank you for joining us for this weekly companion episode. It really does add to the experience that you will have in Yoga Nidra. Please subscribe to receive notifications for this new Yoga Nidra episode as well as for future ones. Thank you for adding your light and kindness to the world and for doing this important inner work. May the afterglow be as bright as the journey is deep. See you soon.